Hello, cooking enthusiasts. This week's video is, of course, a gelato recipe to celebrate the recent release of my first cookbook, Gelato Obsession. This is actually not a recipe from the book, but an original recipe I developed to be sort of a beginner recipe. The first link in the video description will, of course, be the link to download my cookbook for only $5, but below that will be a written version of this gelato recipe. That version calls for using a double boiler, but as you can see, for this particular recipe, you can also microwave the base liquid, or you could also cook this directly on a pot. One of the aspects that makes this flavor a more beginner recipe is that you don't need to hit specific temperatures, unlike the recipes in my book. In this case, you just need to get the milk hot enough to both dissolve the sugar and melt the chocolate that we will add in a bit. The next major aspect that makes this a slightly easier recipe is the need for specialized ingredients. The vast majority of my recipes in the book use 4 specialized ingredients: dextrose, milk powder, xanthan gum, and locust bean gum. This flavor only needs dextrose and xanthan gum. So once the milk was hot, we are using that to dissolve our dry ingredients, which is the dextrose, xanthan gum, salt, a little bit of brown sugar, and in this case, some 85% dark chocolate. I like adding some dark chocolate for this type of recipes because it just makes it a little more of a mature flavor, even though this is sort of about nostalgia. After those ingredients are dissolved slash beginning to melt, it's next important to incorporate the main flavor for this gelato, which is a store-bought snack cake. You can think of this anything like a Hostess or a Little Debbie product. In this case, this is a Canadian brand called a Joe Louis and is my personal childhood favorite. Normally in other flavors, I avoid starchy ingredients, but in this case, that is part of the flavor, and those starches help stabilize the overall recipe. It's also important to note that several of the measurements are tailored to the sugar and fat content of this Joe Louis. The link for the recipe in the description includes a calculator where you can input the sugar and fat content of a snack cake of your choice. This way, you can use any product like this and still achieve a balanced recipe. While actually developing this recipe was a little bit complicated, the online calculator should make it super easy, and the actual procedure is very simple. It's really just about dissolving everything and thoroughly blending to totally break down whatever snack cake you are using. After that initial blending, it needs to go into an ice bath, ideally to cool down rapidly. After cooling down to room temperature, I also like to give it one more blend. This additional blending is more important when working with chocolate. In the link in the description, there is also the option of making a vanilla snack cake recipe, which slightly changes some of the ingredients. That version of the recipe uses milk and cream instead of milk and dark chocolate, so the temperatures and the blending is even less important. With any gelato recipe, I like to let it rest overnight, but you could give it as little as a few hours in the fridge for this particular flavor. Resting is more important when other stabilizers are used, but the starches and xanthan gum are still hydrating slowly with some time in the refrigerator. Then it just requires some churning. I also like to pre-chill my gelato base in the freezer slightly before churning. This makes the churning time a little faster and helps the gelato be slightly more dense. You will definitely need some type of ice cream machine, but this is a super basic model. This recipe is really about the snack cake, so more actual pieces were added. Some of the pieces I actually added early into the churning process so that they would break down slightly. The rest were added at the very end, all chopped up. One last important thing to highlight for the video is that when you are adding mix-ins at the very end of an ice cream like this, you want to work as fast as possible before getting into the freezer. For some reason, my dad spends a few minutes trying to fold these pieces in, but it still worked in the end. So definitely work a little faster if you do try this recipe. Like I said, the recipe calculator and the written instructions for working with any snack cake flavor will be in the video description, just under the link to buy Gelato Obsession for only $5. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and recipe. If you did, please consider sharing and subscribing. Otherwise, thank you for watching.